Hello, and welcome to another video from the YouTube channel, From Religion to Agnostic. Good morning. I was going to do this video on Ada and Zillah, Lamech's two wives. But like I mentioned in my earlier videos, there is very little information on some of these biblical figures. And now note, in my opinion as a researcher, this seems very conspicuous to me, as if like I have said many times since doing the genealogy, extensively, that they are guiding you down one certain path. Sure, you can follow the other genealogies, just to have them abruptly end, or you get two lines, one explaining the meaning of the name, and maybe if they feel you're worthy they may tell you a sibling or parent, but that's it. Again, as I said, they put your focus on one line, Seth's line, but more on that later. Let's go to Methuselah since he is the next with some very interesting information. So Methuselah, well, it starts off. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, Methuselah, also spelled Methuselah, Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, patriarch whose lifespan is recorded in Genesis 5:27, was 969 years. He has survived in legend and tradition as the longest-lived human. Genesis tells nothing about Methuselah beyond sparse genealogical details. He was the great-grandson of Seth, the child of Adam and Eve, begotten more than a century after Cain. He was the father of Lamech and the grandfather of Noah. By the biblical account he came of hardy stock. All his forebears lived for between 895 and 962 years except for his father, Enoch, who lived to be 365. The enumeration of Methuselah in Genesis is his only appearance in the Hebrew Bible save for a mention in I Chronicles 1:3, where he is cited in the lineage of Saul. In the New Testament he is mentioned once in the Gospel of Luke. There, at 3:23-38, the lineage of Joseph, whom people supposed to be the father of Jesus, is traced back 75 generations, through David, and Saul, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to Methuselah and thence to Seth and Adam. According to Wikipedia, and I know many don't trust Wikipedia, and rightfully so, on the other hand they do give some valuable info, but you see that's all in doing research. Finding what's true and what's not, by matching what you're given up with other sources. People often get in trouble because they go to one source and believe in only that one source. Nope, you're doing it wrong. Researching means exploring many paths and comparing them with the oldest known writings, meaning go to other Gnostic sources. You may just be surprised how many things match up. Maybe that's why they tell you to stay away from the Gnostic writings. Not really that they are lies, but that one would know where they stole information and altered it to fit their agenda. So, sorry for the rant, need to be said. Let's move on. According to Wikipedia, Methuselah, man of the javelin, or death of sword, was a biblical patriarch and a figure in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Having died at the age of 969, he lived the longest of all human figures mentioned in the Bible. According to the Book of Genesis, Methuselah was the son of Enoch, the father of Lamech, and the grandfather of Noah. Elsewhere in the Bible, Methuselah is mentioned in genealogies in 1 Chronicles and the Gospel of Luke. His life is described in further detail in extra-biblical religious texts such as the Book of Enoch, Slavonic Enoch, and the Book of Moses. Bible commentators have offered various explanations as to why the Book of Genesis describes him as having died at such an advanced age. Some believe that Methuselah's age is the result of a mistranslation, while others believe that his age is used to give the impression that part of Genesis takes place in a very distant past. Methuselah's name has become synonymous with longevity, and he has been portrayed and referenced in film, television, and music. In the Bible, Methuselah is mentioned here. Genesis 5:21-27. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah 300 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived after the birth of Lamech 782 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. According to the chronology of the Bible, Methuselah died 1 week before the Great Flood. He was also the oldest of all the figures mentioned in the Bible. Methuselah is mentioned once in the Hebrew Bible outside of Genesis, in 1 Chronicles 1:3, he is mentioned in a genealogy of Saul. Methuselah is mentioned a single time in the New Testament, when the Gospel of Luke traces Jesus of Nazareth's lineage back to Adam in Luke 3:23-38. And now we look at another source, the Jewish source from Chabad. Methuselah, Methuselah, son of Enoch, was a prominent spiritual figure during the era prior to the Great Flood. His lifespan is the longest recorded in biblical history, a grand total of 969 years. His name, Methuselah, is a contraction of the words, Matayim Shloshim, 230, referring to the number of parables he typically shared when extolling God's greatness. Methuselah also alludes to having the ineffable name of God engraved upon his sword. Along with Adam, Seth, son of Adam, the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and King David, Methuselah was one of the 7 shepherds, i.e. spiritual leaders of their respective eras. The Talmud teaches that Methuselah was one of 7 people whose years overlapped with those of Adam, the first human. He served under Adam's tutelage for 243 years. The Kabbalists note that Methuselah was privy to mystical traditions and esoteric insights handed down by the elite mystics of his era, and that he was gifted with a uniquely sublime divine soul. Although Methuselah lived during the era preceding the Great Flood, when people led subversive and morally corrupt lives, he remained perfectly righteous. He attempted to sway the people of his generation to align their lives with a better moral lifestyle, but to no avail. Methuselah died of natural causes right before the onset of the flood on the 11th of the Hebrew month of Cheshvan. His legacy according to some Jewish sources. Upon his passing, a 7-day period of mourning was observed, during which God delayed the onset of the flood out of deference to his righteousness. The Midrash teaches that God was so pleased with the honor accorded to Methuselah after his passing that he radiated intense spiritual light, i.e. a heightened divine consciousness, during those 7 days for all of humanity to experience. The acute mourning that occurred was triggered by their being made aware of the sense of spiritual loss felt on high, to the point that even the angels eulogized Methuselah and shed profuse tears over his passing. According to some Kabbalistic sources, the soul of Methuselah continued its corporeal existence, having been reincarnated in the body of Elijah the prophet. In other religious texts we have the apocryphal Book of Enoch claims to be revelations of Enoch, transcribed by him and entrusted to be preserved for future generations by his son, Methuselah. In this book, Enoch recounts 2 visions he has had to Methuselah. The first is about the Genesis flood narrative, and the second chronicles the history of the world from Adam to the Last Judgment. In the latter vision, men are represented as animals. The righteous are white cattle and sheep, the sinners and enemies of Israel are black cattle and wild animals. Following his father's death in the Book of Enoch, Methuselah is designated by God as a priest, while Methuselah's grandson, Noah's brother Ner, is designated by God as his successor. In Slavonic Enoch, Methuselah asks his father for a blessing, and is given instructions on how to live righteously. After their father ascends into heaven, Methuselah and his brothers build an altar and made a great festivity, praising God who had given such a sign by means of Enoch, who had found favor with him. The Book of Jubilees presents itself as the history of the division of the days of the law, of the events of the years, the year, weeks, and the jubilees of the world, and claims to be a revelation of God to Moses, given through the angel of the presence in addition to the written law received by Moses on Mount Sinai, and, while the written law was to be imparted to all, this was to be a secret tradition entrusted only to the saints of each generation, to Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, and Shem, then to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Levi, and finally to the priests and scribes of the latter times. Rabbinic literature states that when Noah was 480 years old all the righteous men were dead, except Methuselah and himself, who were of immense stature as they were descended from the sons of God. At God's command they both announced that 120 years would be given to men for repentance. If in that time they had not mended their evil ways, the earth would be destroyed. But their plea was in vain. Even while Noah was engaged in building the ark, the wicked made sport of him and his work, saying, "If the flood should come, it could not harm us. We are too tall, and, moreover, we could close up with our feet, which were of monstrous size, the springs from below." They resorted to these tactics, but God heated the water, and their feet and the flesh of their bodies was scalded. The 17th century Midrashic Sefer Hayashar, Book of Jasher, describes Methuselah with his grandson Noah attempting to persuade the people of the earth to return to godliness. All other very long-lived people died, and Methuselah was the only one of this class left. God planned to bring the flood after all the men who walked in the ways of the Lord had died, besides Noah and his family. Methuselah lived until the ark was built, but died before the flood, since God had promised he would not be killed with the unrighteous. The Sefer Hayashar gives Methuselah's age at death as 960. Methuselah is also mentioned in Islam in the various collections of tales of the pre-Islamic prophets, which also say he was an ancestor of Noah. Furthermore, early Islamic historians like Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham always included his name in the genealogy of Muhammad. The Book of Moses, a Mormon text, says that after Enoch and the city of Zion were taken up to heaven, Methuselah stayed behind. This was so that God's promises to Enoch, that he would always have descendants on earth and that he would be an ancestor of Noah, would be fulfilled. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints further teaches that Methuselah was a prophet. The Myth of Methuselah. Yugal Levin states that these long lifespans are intended simply to speed the reader from Adam to Noah. Claus Westermann states they are intended to create the impression of a distant past. The Sumerian king list mentions a character named Ubaratutu who seems almost identical to Methuselah. He was the son of Enmendur-Ena, a Sumerian mythological figure often compared to Enoch, as he entered heaven without dying. Ubaratutu was the king of Sumer until a flood swept over his land. Although the ages of Methuselah and Ubaratutu are different, they both died in a great flood. Babylonian writer Berosus also claims that, prior to the events of Babylon's flood myth, kings could live for tens of thousands of years, which bears some similarity to Genesis 5. In Forever Young, A Cultural History of Longevity, Lucian Boya says that the Bible's portrayal of Methuselah and other long-lived figures features traces of the Mesopotamian legends, found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh rules Uruk for 126 years, and his ancestors are said to have ruled for several hundred years each. Boya also notes that tales of kings who lived for thousands of years can be found in both Indian and Chinese mythology, and that the Bible is comparatively restrained in depicting early humans as being able to live for hundreds of years, rather than thousands. Boya notes that following the flood, the Bible depicts its characters' lifespans as gradually diminishing. Noah's sons lived between 400 and 500 years, while Abraham died at 175, Moses died at 120, and David died at 70, an age that the Bible portrays as old for David's time period. Boya compares early biblical figures and their vast lifespans to the people of the Golden Age in Hesiod's poem Works and Days, whose bodies are perpetually youthful. Some believe symbolically that Methuselah's father Enoch, who does not die but is taken by God, is the seventh patriarch, and Methuselah, the eighth, dies in the year of the flood, which ends the 10-generational sequence from Adam to Noah, in whose time the world is destroyed. Boya believes that Methuselah serves the symbolic function of linking the creation and the flood, as Adam would have died during Methuselah's lifetime and Methuselah could have learned about the Garden of Eden from Adam. The kings of the Sumerian king list lived for over 1,000 years, and Mesopotamians believed both that living over 1,000 years made someone divine or somewhat divine, and that their contemporary kings were descended from the kings of the Sumerian king list. Robert News hypothesizes that the author of Genesis made all of its characters die before they turned 1,000 as a polemic against these Mesopotamian beliefs, as well as any claim that a king is divine. News also believes that the author of Genesis said that Methuselah died before he lived 1,000 years to show that he was not divine. Cultural influence of Methuselah. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, Methuselah's name has become a synonym for longevity. Saying that someone is as old as Methuselah is a humorous way of saying that someone is very elderly. In this context, extremely long-lived dogs have been termed Methuselah dogs. The word Methuselarity, a blend of Methuselah and singularity, was coined in 2010 by Aubrey de Grey to mean a future point in time when all of the medical conditions that cause human death would be eliminated, and death would occur only by accident or homicide. A 4,852-year-old Great Basin bristlecone pine, Pinus longeva, tree growing high in the White Mountains of Inyo County in eastern California is called Methuselah. The lyrics of Ira Gershwin's song, It Ain't Necessarily So, 1935, cast doubt on various aspects of the Bible, such as the idea that Methuselah lived so long, the idea that the devil is evil, the story of Jonah, and the story of David and Goliath. The character Flint from the Star Trek, the original series episode, Requiem for Methuselah, is a nearly immortal man who was born in ancient Mesopotamia. His identities include Methuselah, Alexander the Great, Solomon, Lazarus of Bethany, Leonardo da Vinci and Johannes Brahms. Flint becomes lonely after living for a time on a deserted planet, and creates an immortal gynoid to keep him company. He eventually begins to slowly die because he left Earth's atmosphere, and dedicates the remainder of his days to the betterment of mankind. Anthony Hopkins played Methuselah in Darren Aronofsky's 2014 film Noah. In the film, Noah's adopted daughter Isla, played by Emma Watson, is infertile until Methuselah blesses her. Aronofsky's version of Methuselah is a hermit who lives on a mountaintop. In this retelling of the Genesis flood narrative, Methuselah dies during the deluge. In the TV series Altered Carbon, based on Richard K. Morgan's 2002 novel of the same name, a class of people who can afford to live forever by transferring their consciousness into cloned bodies are called Meths, or Methuselahs. In 2016, it was announced that producer David Heyman would produce a biblical epic starring Tom Cruise as Methuselah with Joaquin Ronning to direct. The film is set to show Methuselah as never aging and possessing unparalleled survival skills. The subgiant star HD 140,283 is believed to be the oldest extant star discovered, often nicknamed the Methuselah star, after the ancient biblical figure. Well everyone, that will do it for this video, and I encourage you to please look all this up for yourself, know the truth. I have provided links in the description box below, and from there you can explore more on this biblical figure as well as some of the places mentioned between the Bible and other writings, hint hint. Have a great day, and be safe. If you enjoyed this video, please think about subscribing, as well as hitting the like and sharing would help out a lot. Thank you all, peace out, people.